Hello everyone! Welcome to another great day at the DevDays Europe. I'm your host, Fron Rappel. I'm here with our first speaker of the day, a good friend of mine and one of the few really great experts in the web dev community.
Much too kind.
Welcome,
Thank
this
you,
year,
Flo.
Wenz.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the second day of DevDays Europe.
How are you? How are you feeling? You've just been on a great vacation on Hawaii, so
Yeah.
aloha.
Just returned just for this. So bittersweet, but looking forward. I have to be honest. I'm looking forward to the next 45 minutes. I'm then not looking forward to looking into my emails, but yeah, that's part
Well,
of
I
the game.
mean, everything has two sides, right? So, on the
Absolutely.
one hand, of course, getting great recharge for your energy, and on the other side, of course, being away from work and everything, of course, queues up. But I think you also got something really great in the queue for us today. You are speaking about what's new in .NET 8 and also especially what I'm looking forward with Blazor.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm diving a little bit into the features of the latest .NET 8 version in terms of web application development.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay, let's get
Thank you,
started.
Florian. Thank you for the kind introduction. And again, hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. Indeed, the title says it all. What's new in ASP.NET Core 8 and Blazor 8? Um, this is like significant, or this has been, because it was released late last year. It has been a significant release because, as you may know, um, the even .NET versions, they come with 3 years support, or as Microsoft calls it, long-term support, which of course is pretty great. Having outdated versions of the framework in your application is always kind of technical debt. But on the other hand, there's always so much stuff to do. So not everyone, or not every team, or not every application can be updated every year with the annual cadence of new .NET versions. Um, but 3 years of support is great. So the supports will end in approximately November of 2026. So there's still some time left. Whereas the odd numbers have, as it's called, standard term support. So that's usually 18 months, 1/8. So .NET 7 was released in November 2022. So the support of it is essentially ending. No, probably ended a couple of days ago, right? So if you're still on .NET 7, you have to go on .NET 8. And with that, I would like to, cover a few new features. I mean, there are so many new features in that release. It's always amazing that even with a framework or a technology or a stack as stable and as proven as .NET and ASP.NET Core and everything that's in it, there's still the potential for new features. Which I find pretty amazing. Therefore, we don't have the time to cover it all. Also, there are some features which are really useful, and there are also some features where marketing wants us to use them pretty bad. And I try to give this a personal touch, and I just chose those features which I find interesting and or noteworthy, and usually I've already implemented them in the applications I am responsible for. So I'm pretty confident that they work as expected and pretty well. So this is not a complete or exhaustive list, but these are just a few kind of highlights or things that I find interesting enough to include them today. So ASP.NET Core 8 consists of, well, everything related to web. So we have Razor pages, we have MVC, but you probably have a hunch. I mean, these are feature complete. Razor pages is relatively new, but there are not many new features being added here, except for things under the hood like performance improvement as always. MVC is even older because there already was MVC in the .NET framework pre-core days, right? So if there's innovation, then that innovation often is in rather young additions to the stack. And one of those additions where we have seen more features being added in the last few .NET releases is minimal APIs. So as you know, when you want to do web APIs, REST APIs, things like that, you have been using a controller-based approach in ASP.NET Core and also in ASP.NET pre-core for quite a long time. And then with minimal APIs, new approach was added where there was kind of less typing. And when this was new, there was no feature parity. You could do all of the important things, but some bits and pieces were missing. And these were added bit by bit in the last few .NET releases. And therefore, it is no surprise that also in .NET 8, some feature gaps were closed when comparing minimal APIs to controller-based web APIs. For instance, if you have a web API and you'd like to bind form data to it, there's a new attribute now, from form. So what's a good use case for that? Because that sounds a little bit weird. If you have a regular form, right, and then you send the data to an endpoint, you can just use model binding to access the data, right? Imagine you have an HTML form, and that form is posted to a web API. And that form is using the encoding type multipart form data, right? So not x-dub form URL encoded, but multipart form data, because in that form you have a file upload and you have other form fields. So you can bind the form upload and the file upload to one variable in your handler method, and you can use from form to bind individual form fields to other variables. So that's kind of the idea here. So you see, kind of edge case or rare case, but it was missing. Now it's added, so we can use that. Also, there's a new middleware for protection against cross-site request forgery attacks. And as you may know, I'm deeply invested in web application security and try to foster that. So everything security related is great, if you ask me. On the other hand, usually an API is using bearer tokens, where the threat of cross-site request forgery is much lower than if you have, say, a session and cookie-based application. Therefore, okay, nice to have, but you'll see it almost never in production, right? So that's minimal APIs. And then there is another thing which was newly added, which I like it quite a lot, actually. And it's called Identity API. And actually, let me show you. Let me show you in a simple example, okay? So I have a simple application here. And that simple application essentially has an endpoint /protected, and that endpoint outputs the user's identity's name. And we have require authorization here. So that minimal API endpoint now really requires authorization in some way or another, right? So that's pretty nice. So if we run this application, of course, nothing happens at the root, but if you go to protected, then you see HTTP 401, right? It's a bit small to see here. Thank you, Chrome. But essentially, we are not allowed to talk to that application because we lack authorization. Now, what we can do now is we can add identity endpoints. So I've already set up the application to use authorization, and then I'm using the scaffolding for ASP.NET Core identity so that we can work with identity users, have a database backend, etc., etc. But the interesting thing now, and that's the actual innovation or the new feature is, I can add API endpoints to log in. So what I can do is first I'm using map group so that the new API endpoints have a path prefix, and then I just say map identity API, and identity user is the user class I'd like to use. And what this gives me is two new endpoints, one to register a user and one to log in as a user. So actually we could actually have a look at Postman to send the HTTP request. So again, talking to the protected endpoint gives us for one unauthorized. And then I have an endpoint called register, where I just send user data, super simple endpoint, email address and some password. Don't try this at home, obviously. And this actually will then register the user against the data store. So let me just see. I should probably restart the application so that the new endpoint is known, because so far we got a 404. So let's see whether it's ready now. There you go. Did we get a response yet? No, not yet. Let me quickly check. Sorry for that. Connection refused. Okay, because the application is still waiting to run. So let's try this one more time. Okay. I think that looks better now. Okay, let's give this one more try. Otherwise, I just tell you what will happen next. Actually, I'll do that right away while this is still building. There we should be. So register user. Now it takes a little longer. That's a good sign. So there's an endpoint listening, and now data is written to the database using Entity Framework Core. And then we get back 202 OK. So the user was now added. And then the other endpoint is /identity/login. Now we can use the data, log into the application. And what do we get back? We get back an access token. Oh, interesting. So let's copy that access token to the clipboard and then use that access token for our protected endpoint. So I'm just pasting this in. Let's see what's happening. And now we get reply back. Okay, so we could now register, we could log in, and this is now possible with just the addition of, well, essentially one line of code. And sorry for the lengthy demo, but I find this really, really interesting. Definitely wanted to show you that. So no ASP.NET Core identity scaffolding where you get this login screen and this whole admin UI, etc. No, you just get those two endpoints. And with those endpoints, you can use bearer tokens. There's also a way to use cookies if you'd like to use cookies for authentication there. When this was released, it was called an early version. So I was asking, okay, early version, does it mean the API could change? And they said no, they don't expect any API changes. So this might be great for single page applications. To hook into ASP.NET Core identity with all of this extra scaffolding. Another area where there are new features when it relates to ASP.NET Core is that the tooling has been improved. And of course, if tooling has been improved as part of a .NET release, then that tooling usually means Visual Studio. Maybe sometimes Visual Studio Code, but usually it's Visual Studio. So better auto completion, better color coding when working with routes or routes, however you'd like to pronounce them. I always trip up when I work with routes because I make typos or, I put my routes in the wrong order. I find this highly confusing. But now with auto completion, with color coding, if I have placeholders in my route, it's a tiny thing, but personally, it helped me a great deal. Also at compile time, I get warnings if I have conflicting routes, for instance. So really, really useful. But basically for ASP.NET Core, that's more or less it, because most of the innovation usually happens where the technology is still young. And of course, this relates to Blazor. And when working with Blazor, I mean, the first aspect where you see some changes is when you set up a new project and then you filter Once this has been loaded, you filter for Blazor projects. What kind of templates you see here depends a little bit which .NET SDKs you have on your system. If you only have .NET 8, then there are less options than when you already had .NET 7. So what do we have? We have a new master template, so to speak, Blazor Web App. And apart from that, we have a Blazor WebAssembly standalone app and a Blazor WebAssembly empty app. So empty app means we don't have this, all of the Blazor applications look the same, right? We don't have the standard template with the standard color gradient and navigation on the left, bootstrap icons, etc. So these are the main templates now. There's also Blazor server app. Okay, nice. Let's pick that. And when we set up a Blazor server app, then there might be a surprise because the list of frameworks here on my system shows me .NET 6 still in support until November this year, and .NET 7. There's no .NET 8 in here. There is no Blazor server template in .NET 8, and we'll see in a second why that is so. But first, let's go back to the slides. So we have the new main template. And again, the list of templates here depends on what's installed in your system. If you don't have the .NET 6 or .NET 7 SDK, you won't have anything with Blazor server in it. Does that mean that Blazor server apps cease to work with .NET 8? No, they don't. In the project file, when setting up an app, or if you have an existing app, just change the target framework to .NET 8, and then you're good. It's expected to run as before. But the mechanism changed a little bit. So before Blazor 8 or .NET 8 and the Blazor that comes with it, there were two hosting models for Blazor. One was Blazor server. That's the top diagram. So the application was essentially running in the server. The browser just got some JavaScript code. The JavaScript code used a WebSocket connection leveraged by Signal R to stay in sync with the server, and if some code runs on the server, then the updated layout was sent to the browser via that connection, and if in the browser a client-side event occurred that is relevant for Blazor, then that information was sent back to the server via that WebSocket connection. So kind of like ASP.NET Web Forms, but on steroids. And the second hosting model was Blazor, or is Blazor WebAssembly, shown here in the bottom. And with Blazor WebAssembly, the Blazor application, and I simplify things a little bit, of course, is compiled down to WebAssembly, which then can run in the browser. So the application can be independent on the server. But of course, if there's some data needed, information from a database, for instance, there needs to be an API. So the browser speaks to the server via, well, JavaScript code. But no, it's not really JavaScript code. It's C# code written in the Blazor application, which is then compiled down to WebAssembly code. So these are the two hosting models of Blazor before .NET 8. Now, these kind of exist still in .NET 8. .NET 8 still has a WebAssembly project template, so that continues to work as expected. There is no definite server template, but as I mentioned, server apps still work. And now there's a third hosting model, and Microsoft calls that static server-side rendering. So essentially, the server renders HTML, sends it to the browser. If something happens on the browser, the data is sent back to the server via HTTP, and then content may be rendered and sent again. If you think this kind of sounds like the 1990s have returned, like we did websites back then, you are not wrong, right? So it looks a little bit weird, but of course, there's a difference between having static HTML on the server that is then sent down. No. You have the full Blazor experience. You have the Blazor component model. So the applications are implemented as before. But if you have what and Microsoft, I think, calls it in the documentation if you have like a static content. What does static content mean? In an essence, no JavaScript event handler. So if you have just content to show without any click event handlers, then this is a perfect way to go. Why? Because you don't need a WebSocket connection for that. The WebSocket connection, of course, requires resources on the server, at least one connection per client, right? And also on the client side, it requires resources. Also, no WebAssembly download required. WebAssembly is great, except for the first load, because essentially all of the DLLs that are required need to be WebAssemblyfied. Okay, that can be prearranged, but then needs to be downloaded in the browser. So the initial load takes a while. But for static content, this is just the best. I take some offense with the term. I find it a bit confusing, and I think Glenn Henriksen put it best. So either it's something static or there's server-side rendering. But well, that's just how it's called. Now let's sum up what I've just quickly described to you. So we have static server-side rendering. This is the new default when creating an application. And let me show you how you can see that. When I start this, use this Blazor web app template and just want to create a new Blazor web app, then on the next screen of this wizard, of course, I was too fast. Apologies. Well, you see it here in the background. Let's hold that moment. Apart from framework version, you could set the interactive render mode. Okay, that was of course too fast. So basically, you say, okay, which of those hosting or render modes we just discussed, which of those should be used? You could say, yeah, use server. So if you pick server here, you essentially get a Blazor server application, or you set WebAssembly and you have a Blazor WebAssembly application. And that interactive render mode, that basically means server, WebAssembly, or just static content. And you can set this per page or per component or globally for the whole application, right? But there's also another option. And that other option is called auto. So what is the auto render mode? Remember, before that we had server and WebAssembly. WebAssembly is performance-wise awesome once it's in the browser, because everything then runs in the browser on a WebSocket connection. The WebSocket option is great for the initial load because everything runs on the server. We only have to initiate the WebSocket connection. So what auto does is this. We start in Blazor server mode because it's fast. So the application is there. The application is interactive. We can work with it. But as soon as the application is launched, so to speak, in the browser, WebSocket connection is established, then the WebAssembly version of the app is sent down the wire into the browser. And that takes a while, right? But the application is still there, so users don't notice. And once the WebAssembly code has been sent to the browser, the render mode is switched. So from server, we go to WebAssembly. So we have a fast start, and after, in the background, WebAssembly stuff has been sent to the browser, we switch over to fast execution. That's pretty awesome, actually. And I couldn't believe it at first how well it worked, but it worked pretty well. All right. So much additional stuff I could discuss here. Maybe one thing I won't show it. I will just describe it. And that's that streaming rendering option. And in our Blazor application, and actually, let's go back to my previous demo app. In my in the Blazor application, we have this bogus weather forecast service, right? And that usually looks like this. I mean, do we have it? No, we don't have it here, but we have it in the template. So it's usually here like a weather forecast, right? So you get a table with some random weather data, and in a real-world application, that data would come from an API, and that API might take some time to retrieve and calculate the data. Of course, here's random data; it's super quick. And now, what a typical pattern is like this, right? So we wait for the weather forecast come from the API, and before that day, we just say loading. We have a loading spinner or some loading text here, and once the data is there, we render this. Now, with static rendering, the server would wait until the API data is there. So this would never be sent to the client. Only the end result would be sent to the client. But if we say use streaming rendering instead, then first the loading spinner would be sent to the client. Remember, we have some JavaScript logic in the client. And then once the weather forecast data is there, it would be replaced by this. Without a WebSocket connection, it's just one HTTP response with chunks. Pretty amazing feature. So this makes this really nice. So we have static server rendering, server Blazor server, Blazor WebAssembly, the auto mode, and you can configure it app-wide or component-wide or on an individual page. Microsoft calls this full stack web UI. Yeah, it's a weird term, but I think now you have a good understanding what this is all about. There are several other interesting new features in the new release, and I just like to pinpoint a few of those. One that I find pretty interesting is a UI for Blazor identity. So you may know ASP.NET Core identity, where we have the UI where you can register user login, and then you have the admin area, and in that admin area you get a list of users, you can administer them, stuff like that. This is now also available for Blazor applications. So you could either scaffold it in. So if you have an application, you can add a new scaffolded item, and then in a Blazor application, you will then have an identity option here. Depends on how the application is set up. But since this is usually pretty brittle, what I recommend instead is if you just set up a new Blazor web app, add to the project, and you send the authentication type to individual accounts, then that UI is automatically rendered in. So you'll get this out of the box. Looks super similar to the one from ASP.NET Core Identity. So definitely check that out. I don't want to demo that. I want to demo something else. And that's something that I think I've showed last year when we talked about novelties in ASP.NET Core 7. And that was Quick Grid. Quick Grid is a simple yet pretty well-performing data grid in Blazor. And this is like the top requested feature for Blazor applications, that there should be a grid as part of the default release of Blazor. Of course, it cannot and should not be as powerful as all of those third-party grids, but for simple requirements, that this would be built in, and it was delivered as an alpha version for .NET 7, and now it is version 1.0. And it's a NuGet package, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Quick Grid. There's also an adapter for Entity Framework, so you can connect it to a data store. And there is also a scaffolder for CRUD functionality in Blazor now. So create, read, update, delete. You know that already from Razor Pages and from MVC, that you have a data model, and then you say, okay, just generate me pages for entering something into the database, getting everything out of the database, updating and deleting. The same thing is now also available for Blazor, and can be scaffolded as well, using that add new scaffolded item feature I just quickly showed you. I like to show you the quick grid though. So yeah, let's use that sample app here. So I have an application and I have a grid page, and that's essentially the code we're talking about. I have a quick grid. That's the new control or component that ships as part of that NuGet package. And the quick grid can display a couple of items, and I can set the items to the item property. And I can also use pagination. Pagination is done by a separate component, the paginator. Paginator is here, and basically these are connected like this within the quick grid, which is if you have ever worked with ASP.NET web forms, it's kind of like the grid view control there. So essentially, you just define the columns, and then you say, okay, which of the properties from that items collection here shall be shown in which column. So I have an ID, a percent, or a topic, and I don't have a database backend here. I just at random picked a few presentations I'm gonna watch today with the time when they are starting, and that's my list of presentations. And what I also did here is I was adding a search box where I can show how to filter for specific topics, and my filtering logic is pretty simple. I just check whether the topic contains the data input into the field. The pagination I set up like this. I just show 3 items per page. We have 7 presentations, so this gives me 3 pages. So basically, that's it. So minimal code, mostly markup. So let's have a look at the application. So let's go to quick grid page, and you see we have pagination here. We can go back and forth. We can sort by presenter, and we can also have the filter here. So that works actually pretty well. So all the topics which contain RE. So that's here core. Here it's Azure. And here it's the credibility. So we have 3 hits here, right? So pretty nice. And again, if you just want data to display quickly, and it also works great with large amounts of data thanks to virtualization, this is the way to go. All right. So many more things we could cover. I just picked a few which I would run over rather quickly, just that you get a complete picture of what's in the new release. There's been a lot of ongoing work on AOT, so ahead of time compilation. Ahead of time compilation is or may be relevant for certain scenarios. So essentially, the compiler generates assembly code. And AOT also has a specific target architecture. So essentially, you can do trimming on the compiled application and only have the instructions in the application that are relevant for the target architecture. So only ARM code and no x64 code, for instance. And what's new is now that gRPC now enjoys full support for AOT, and there's also some limited support for minimal APIs, including a new AOT template. There's still some issues because AOT is harder than it thinks. If something is compiled ahead of time, some dynamic constructs, like reflection, for instance, are not possible because the idea of reflection is that you do something while it runs and not during compile time. So, for instance, if we look at the code that is generated by using the Web API AOT templates. Pretty simple code here. So it's a super simple to-do app using minimal APIs, right? This works AOT style, but JSON serialization, there are some extra steps required here because also JSON serialization is of a dynamic nature which collides with AOT. So it's possible, but there are some extra loops to jump through. But basically, it's now possible, at least for certain types of APIs. There are some advantages and disadvantages with that approach. So check whether that is something for you, but yes. And it's ongoing work. There's a GitHub issue and a ticket that is not updated very often, which basically lists where AOT is not possible yet. Many other more things, but there is one thing I definitely would like to at least discuss with you, because Microsoft is betting quite a bit on it at the moment, and that is .NET Aspire. .NET Aspire is, as Microsoft itself calls it, an opinionated framework for distributed applications. So the idea is you have a typical distributed application, a UI, say Blazor, an API backend, maybe a Redis cache, so that you can cache things, and you somehow need to orchestrate those things. So they have to work together, but they have to work together on all of your systems, on your local system, on your test system, on your production system. And what .NET Aspire basically does is it sets that up for you in an opinionated fashion. So Aspire insists on some things while giving you flexibility on some others, and it also comes with a nice dashboard. So let's see whether that works. I have to switch to another version of Visual Studio for that though, because it requires a preview version. At least as of now, a preview version of Visual Studio. So I have Visual Studio 17.10. And in here, I have an Aspire application. So it also works with the 17.9 preview, but it has to be the preview version. Otherwise, you don't have the workloads available for .NET Aspire. And if you set up a new project, you have .NET Aspire as an option here. And there are a couple of project templates which you can use. What I've been using is the .NET Aspire Start application, because it already sets up an application with Blazor frontend, a web API, and a Redis cache, and also a test project as well, which we can use to also run tests against our application. And the entry point is the app host project here. And the app host project, essentially orchestrates everything, sets everything up. So we have a web frontend project, and we have a cache. And you see those kind of magic strings here, cache, web frontend. And these are essentially the placeholders. So when this is later deployed, you just work with web frontend as a string, cache as a string. And then during deployment, this is then replaced with the actual hosts or endpoints you are using. Same for the API service, right? So also magic string. So no configuration file where we have to set up everything. All right. So for this to work, since I'm using Redis, you have to have Docker available and running on your system. So let's actually see whether this works. So this now, starting the app host, then also starts all of the other aspects of the application. So the API service and the UI, and tries to connect the Redis cache. So let's see. Okay, we've got something starting in the browser. It's a Blazor app, and you see, this is a dashboard now. So we see the cache. The cache is already running. We have the API service. We have the web frontend, and then, for instance, we can go to the web frontend. We have a counter component, and as always, and we have this weather service. And whenever I click on weather, you see, sometimes we get the same weather, but after a few seconds, we get a different weather forecast. So this is the Redis cache in action, which is good for, I think, 5 seconds here. I am presenting this intentionally on a German system. Why? Because you see it's been localized into the German language automatically, although everything else here on that system is in English. And for instance, if you go to the API, you get the console protocol here, also for the cache, we can also drill into some details here. So, for instance, for the API service, we can have a look at the logs, at the environment variables. We can do tracing, so calling that /weather endpoint here just it calls to the front end, but every 5 seconds or so we have a call to the API service as well. And so we can really drill down into things here. So pretty cool, pretty amazing. And still a preview, but I would encourage you to try it out actually now, even before it's been released. So pretty cool. And as I already mentioned, you have a couple of templates you can use here, and then you get some kind of dashboard. All right. The feature you all will enjoy when upgrading to .NET 8, and that's the last thing I'd like to show and mention, is one which doesn't require any work of you. The performance has just been improved. I mean, there's always been discussions how relevant those performance tests are, and how optimized sometimes the code is just to be good at the performance tests, not in general. But still, the runtime razor compilation has greatly improved. I noticed that myself, but also JSON APIs are now much faster. So really, still great improvements for the performance. Of course, doesn't let the previous releases shine that much if there's still so much potential for performance improvements, but you'll get that out of the box. And just for the because of the long-term support, if you're on .NET 6, you've got 5 months to go, essentially, or 6 months to go. So I do encourage you to upgrade to .NET 8 as soon as possible. And although ASP.NET Core is almost feature complete, there's still some innovation, especially in the Blazor area. Performance has been improved, resilience has been improved, and ASP.NET Core 9 will be released in half a year anyway. So work on new improvements and new features is already ongoing. So check out the space. And with that, thanks for attending. If there are any questions, happy to let Florian discuss them with you or other topics. And with that, thank you for attending. Have a great conference. And hopefully see you next year again.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so far I see 2 questions. Let's go over them really briefly, and maybe let's kick it off with what's your favorite feature in Blazor for .NET 8?
My favorite feature, and that's a little bit of a dark horse, I have to say, because it's something really it looks irrelevant, but I'm big on security, right? And I love content security policy. And content security policy is basically a feature that locks down the browser and allows the browser only to run selected pieces of JavaScript code and load selected resources. When using Blazor WebAssembly, you had to use a kind of unsecure feature of content security policy called unsafe eval in order to be able to run Blazor WebAssembly applications with content security policy. With Blazor 8, this is no longer necessary. Small thing, and almost no one noticed that in the new release, but I love it.
Great, awesome. All right, now the second question. This goes also, of course, fully into Blazor. With auto rendering and streaming, Blazor is catching up a bit with frameworks like, of course, Angular, React, and
yeah,
Vue.
I think it was inspired especially by React. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But what do you, in your opinion, what is still missing to close the gap even further, or maybe even get ahead? Because so far, I mean, this is mostly playing catch up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that's a hot take, but I would argue that the target audiences of those frameworks are maybe not necessarily the same. So let's use a simple. Let me put that in a simple fashion. So apologies. I've seen traction, or I've seen Angular and React use in the .NET space. I have not seen Blazor use outside the .NET the .NET space, right? If you have heavily invested in C# and would like to do single page applications, then Blazor is definitely something to look at, especially if you want to avoid writing JavaScript or TypeScript code. If you do not want to avoid writing JavaScript and TypeScript code, then maybe Angular and React and Vue.js are more to your liking, right? So I think the goal of the Blazor team is not to have feature parity with Angular and React, but just provide a very solid mechanism to implement C# backed single page applications and also align with trends in the SPA world, including that server side rendering, which now was reborn after like a decade of avoiding doing server side rendering.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I don't see any more questions. I would say that's it. Thanks again for the awesome session. Also, hopefully, will not be too terrible now looking at your email stack, but be prepared.
It's a high number, but yeah, you got to do what you got to do. I won't complain. All right. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone. Have an
Thanks
awesome
a
day.
lot.
Thanks, Florian. See
Thank
you all
you.
soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.